Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Catalina of Motril, Katherine of Aragon's black servant. Inside the court of Henry VIII was somewhere that so many men and women across England dreamed of being a part of. Henry VIII is remembered for the most brutal and savage king that England has ever had, and during his almost 4-decade-long reign, 70,000 people were executed in England. Even 2 of his wives lost their heads inside of the Tower of London. But what is not as well known is that within Henry VIII's court was a servant who was very different to the rest. Catalina of Motril was the former servant of Katherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. And she was also one of the only black women to have appeared in Tudor court, but she also may have held important knowledge on one of Tudor England's biggest scandals. Catalina of Motril was born in Motril, in Granada, before 1501. Around this year she was enslaved, and this likely occurred during the Spanish Reconquista. Her homeland was on the lovely warm southern coast of Spain, and since the 1200s it had been a Muslim territory. However, in 1492, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon seized control of the area. At this time, thousands of Muslim Moors emigrated from their home in Granada to North Africa. But there were many that could not escape, and there were others who did not leave their homes. Because of this, a large number of these people were enslaved, and it's possible that Catalina was one of these women enslaved at a young age. It's almost certain that Catalina was not her real name also, and she may have been named after Katherine of Aragon, who became her royal mistress when she was enslaved inside of Spain, before she moved to England. She was also converted to Christianity, as this was common when Christian slave owners had Muslim slaves. Isabella of Castile, the Spanish queen, was the mother of Katherine of Aragon, and it had been organised that Katherine would leave Spain and go to marry the English heir presumptive Arthur Tudor. Arthur was the eldest son of King Henry VII, who it's believed was the great hope for the Tudor dynasty. Along with Katherine, Catalina of Motril also left for England, and 2 unnamed enslaved women were recorded as being with Catherine's large entourage when she came to England, and it's likely that Catalina was one of these. The Spanish party arrived in London on the 12th of November 1501, and there was great celebration. Inside of London, the Spanish party made a big impact on the people of London, as they made their way through the capital in their clothes that the Londoners had never seen before. Thomas More also described that they were a group of pygmy Ethiopians with them. This is probably as he was not used to seeing black people inside of England, and 2 days after Catherine arrived in London, she married Prince Arthur Tudor at Old St Paul's Cathedral. Catalina, as a royal bedchamber servant, would have been involved in preparing the royal bed in which Arthur and Catherine would have spent their wedding night in. A Spanish source stated that Catalina was responsible for the making the bed and attending the other secret service of Her Highness's chamber. Tudor royal beds were unbelievable in their decor and design, and they often had roof canopies, hangings, curtains and carvings on the wooden beams. The Queen's bed included 2 pairs of sheets made from the best linen, 2 long pillows and 2 square ones with a blanket of fine scarlet wool furred with ermine and bordered with velvet and cloth of gold. One set of bedding that belonged to Katherine of Aragon did contain the coats of arms of England and Spain, showing the union between the 2 countries joined by the marriage of her and Arthur. It's possible that these were used on the wedding night and that Catalina would have prepared these. The royal bed was one of the most important parts of the royal chamber, and Catalina must have been very close to Katherine of Aragon. It's likely that they spoke freely about relationships, and it's likely that Catalina was well informed about Catherine's bedtime antics, especially with her new husband, Prince Arthur. This would later become a huge point of contention when Henry VIII wished to divorce Katherine of Aragon, and he claimed that if Katherine and Arthur had consummated their marriage, then Henry would have been free to annul Katherine himself, as he would claim that it was against God's law for him to marry his dead brother's wife. Katherine would claim nothing happened between her and Arthur, but it's likely that Catalina would know really what happened, and when the information was sought by the king, Catalina, it's assumed, stayed loyal to Katherine of Aragon, and the future queen would have respected this greatly. But just a few months after marrying, Catherine and Arthur went to Ludlow Castle, and the pair was struck down by an illness. Catherine would recover, but Arthur did not and died on the 2nd of April 1502. Henry VII was king, and he was concerned about the damage to the alliance between England and Spain, and because of his son's death he managed to negotiate Catherine's marriage details. With this, Catherine was betrothed to Henry VII's other son, also named Henry, who became King Henry VIII. Prince Henry was too young to marry at the time, and for 5 years Katherine of Aragon lived inside of London with her household, including Catalina of Motril. She lived off money given to her by Henry VII, and complained that she could not pay her servants at this tough time. But Catalina would become accustomed to England and the local landscape of London. But when Henry VII died, Catalina's mistress would become the queen, and preparations were made for the marriage of Katherine of Aragon and Henry VIII, and the future coronation that would come after. On the 11th of June 1509, Catherine and Henry were married, and yet again it would have been Catalina of Motril who prepared the marriage bed for her mistress, but this time it would be Henry VIII who she would be setting the bed up for. But when the coronation took place, it was a celebration that went on for a number of days, and it began with a short stay for Catherine with her husband at the Tower of London before the ceremony took place at Westminster Abbey. Catalina would have stayed with Catherine in the Tower of London, in the lavish apartments which were built by King Henry VII. Whilst the celebrations occurred in the Tower, Catalina would be close to Catherine and would have been preparing her for the procession to Westminster Abbey and her coronation. At this time, slavery was outlawed in England, but there were some English traders after Henry's reign who would sail to Africa and trade in enslaved people, founding the beginning of the triangular slave trade. Catalina was referred to as the Queen's slave 30 years after, and it's not known whether she was free to leave or had been released. Catalina at some point did leave England and went back to Spain for unknown reasons, and when she got back she married a man called Oviedo, who made crossbows for a living. It's possible that Oviedo went to England to show off his wares to Henry VIII, and it may have been here where the couple met. They settled in Malaga and had 2 daughters, and when her husband died, Catalina went back to Motril and arrived home from the place she had been captured decades before. But there are a few questions that the Tudor court wished to find out from Catalina. A Spanish delegation were looking for information about Catherine's past, and in particular what had happened with her wedding night and Arthur Tudor. But it's not known whether Catalina died before the Spanish delegation could question her, and it's believed that she took the information about Katherine of Aragon and Arthur Tudor to the grave. Compared to many other slaves, she had a very different life living inside of the royal court, but she was still enslaved and was transported to live thousands of miles away. She would return later and died where she was born, and Catalina was a favoured and liked member of Katherine of Aragon's court. In 1531, she had been called to testify that Catherine had not been a virgin after a wedding night, and it was said in front of the court that she had returned to Spain, and the details never came to light. It's also probable that Catalina also had to tend to Catherine during her dark times when she had problems in pregnancy. Catherine fell pregnant a number of times, but only one daughter, the future Mary I, survived. It's probable that Catalina had to help her mistress cope with her emotions during these difficult times. There is no evidence to say whether Catalina was also paid for her service, so it's unsure if she remained a slave in England or whether she was a paid member of the household. Interestingly though, new research has also come to light that Catalina was not the only black person to be preparing for the coronation of Henry VIII and Catherine. A black trumpeter named John Blanke had been in royal service, and he was of African descent, and he appeared in the Westminster Tournament Roll of 1511 and took part in the coronation dressed in scarlet clothes. But Catalina of Motril had a remarkable life despite being stolen from her homeland in a conflict involving the Spanish Queen and King. She found herself in service of the daughter of the Spanish Queen, and then travelled to England, a foreign land thousands of miles away from her home. She was a trusted and valued member of the household of Henry VIII's first wife. And what is nice about her story is that eventually she managed to make her way home to her homeland. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.